The air never truly cleared. It hung thick with a specific tension, like static electricity before a storm that never broke, a direct emanation from the Emperor's paranoia, dictating the very air we breathed. I felt born into this system, perpetually suffocating, a bird in a gilded cage I hadn't recognized. Agency was an illusion. Outwardly, he projected unshakable, tyrannical power, tolerating no dissent. His gaze unwavering, his dominion was a constant battle against imagined threats, making him the ultimate prisoner of his own creation. The throne wasn't freedom, it was the most gilded of cages, trapping him. Recognizing this was my first quiet shift. The aftermath of his public pronouncements left an unsettling quiet, but it wasn't the silence of defeat, it was the quiet of observation. My initial shock gave way to a detached curiosity, a shift from merely enduring his grandstanding to actively dissecting it. What I saw beneath the bluster was not strength, but a frantic performance. His booming accusations and the suffocating grip of his control no longer struck me as signs of power, but rather as desperate attempts to mask a deep-seated paranoia. The more loudly he declared his unwavering authority, the more acutely I sensed his profound insecurity. My enforced silence, so often misinterpreted as compliance, became an invaluable shield. While others were swayed by his constant noise, I used my stillness as a conduit, absorbing every tense glance, every exaggerated gesture, every fleeting hesitation in his confident facade. The relentless public declarations, intended to crush dissent, instead revealed the true fragility beneath. The question was no longer times if times he had a weakness, but times what times precisely terrified him enough to require such an elaborate, constant charade. The grand edifice I had revered for so long, the one built on the Emperor's tireless work and an image of unimpeachable strength, finally began to reveal its structural flaws. For decades, his influence had been less a guiding hand and more an all-encompassing shadow, particularly for me. I had moved through my life with a quiet deference, my every financial decision, every professional aspiration tethered to his approval or outright control. This wasn't malice born of joy, I eventually understood, but a profound, almost pathological fear of losing control himself. A primal terror rooted perhaps in some deep past failure or insecurity he never spoke of, manifesting as an insatiable need to dominate every variable. His elaborate system of financial oversight, veiled as prudent management, was in truth a cage. Every investment required his signature, every significant withdrawal, his explicit consent. This constant dependency had eroded my confidence, fostering a subtle but pervasive fear of ever stepping out of line, of ever truly charting my own course. My compliance had become second nature, a quiet hum beneath the surface of my daily life. Yet, as the quiet of my own home deepened, a new clarity emerged. I saw his relentless power grabs not as strength, but as a desperate attempt to shore up an internal fragility. The facade was imposing, certainly, but behind it, I now recognized the faint echo of a desperate man, clinging to his empire with white-knuckled intensity. This understanding didn't excuse his actions, but it explained the meticulous, ruthless tactics he employed, particularly the systematic financial chokehold that had constrained my entire adult life. Now, the silence wasn't fear. It was focus. The ringing silence in the house, after years of his constant noise, was the first sign. It wasn't the kind of quiet that healed. It was the kind that focused. Where my past self might have reacted with anger, met chaos with chaos, the woman sitting at my kitchen table now simply observed. The emotional maelstrom of before was a distant, disorienting fog. I closed my eyes, picturing the intricate web of his influence, the threads he pulled, the dependencies he'd engineered. My breath was slow, steady. No more lashing out, no more futile arguments. That game was his. My game would be different. One of cold, precise logic, where every move was a calculated measure, not a desperate reaction. I envisioned his entire edifice not as an impenetrable fortress, but as a structure designed with specific weaknesses, relying on predictable patterns. He thrived on public confrontation, on grand, noisy gestures, always expecting me to scream, demand, expose. Instead, I would become the shadow he never saw coming. My plan wasn't fiery revenge, but methodical dismantling, severing ties, exposing vulnerabilities, redirecting resources with surgical, almost invisible precision. Each step was small, independent, and untraceable. I would lay tripwires where he least expected them. He expected a storm. I would deliver a drought, slowly drying out the wellsprings of his power. Have you ever felt trapped, wondering if your own calculated silence could be your greatest weapon? Share your thoughts below. The first pieces were already in motion, ready to surface. The quiet patience I'd cultivated transitioned into a methodical campaign, a deliberate deconstruction of the image so carefully built. While the Emperor broadcast an aura of unshakable authority and financial genius, projecting invincibility to all who would listen, I was quietly compiling a digital paper trail that told a very different story. Each screenshot of suspiciously routed transactions, every time-stamped entry in the detailed email archives, and the chilling audio from discreetly recorded phone calls became a brick in the foundation of their eventual collapse. I spent weeks, not days, meticulously organizing these fragments, cross-referencing dates and flagging inconsistencies, a task that demanded focused precision over frantic haste. My legal consultations with specialists in corporate fraud and property law confirmed my suspicions, outlining the potential liabilities. But the real game changer, the true pattern interrupt, arrived after nearly a month of resource-intensive investigation by a private firm. Their final report, delivered in a thick, unassuming binder, detailed a labyrinthine web that led to an undisclosed shell company, discreetly controlling significant assets. Deeper within, nestled among standard filings, was a copy of an old, illegally modified deed, a foundational property ownership document that, in the cold light of discovery, revealed the Emperor's true financial precarity and a blatant legal vulnerability I hadn't anticipated. It was an Achilles heel, expertly hidden, now exposed. The quiet preparation was complete. The instruments of justice were now ready. The shift wasn't a roar, but a ripple. I started to hear the whispers of minor inconveniences reaching him, an unexpected inquiry from the state's commercial licensing board, then a tax notice for unaccounted for discretionary funds. These were seemingly innocuous, yet relentless. His initial response, I learned, was dismissive arrogance, a scoff at such trivialities. He'd always believed himself beyond scrutiny, but as the inquiries multiplied and whispers of staff disloyalty reached his ears, a frantic edge crept into his voice. My own continued silence, meanwhile, was the loudest sound amidst his growing disquiet, the quiet blade steadily moving. The quiet I had carefully cultivated was short-lived, replaced by a storm of his own making. The Emperor, no longer shielded by ignorance, lashed out with a fury as predictable as it was frantic. My inbox flooded with belligerent cease and desist letters, poorly disguised attempts to intimidate. Simultaneously, a public smear campaign ignited across social media, whispers amplified into outright fabrications designed to discredit my character. His strategy was pure noise, frantic calls to mutual contacts, veiled threats, and the spreading of increasingly absurd rumors. Every public forum became his stage, a chaotic performance of self-preservation. This aggressive pushback brought its own frictions, of course. Legal fees mounted with each frivolous claim, a steady drain on my resources as my team calmly cataloged the baseless accusations. It was frustrating, a constant low hum of distraction. Yet, amidst his escalating chaos, I maintained my composure. My response was not to engage in his public spectacle, but to observe, document, and strategize. Each reckless statement, every baseless accusation, was a gift, another piece of evidence demonstrating his erratic judgment. While he yelled, we quietly built our case. The more he railed, the more he exposed his own instability, creating a stark contrast that would soon become undeniable. The heavy oak door of the conference room clicked shut behind me, sealing us in a silence that was far more potent than any shout. He expected a plea, perhaps tears, but what I laid across the polished table were facts. A bound dossier, meticulously organized. Inside were not assumptions, but irrefutable proof. The certified forensic audit exposing the financial fraud, the incriminating email threads, coordinating the shell company transfers, and the notarized affidavits from employees coerced into complicity. His face, usually a mask of practiced indifference, began to crack, a slow, sickening crumple as he saw the time-stamped transaction logs, the damning paper trail that closed every open loop. He stammered, attempted a dismissive laugh, then a desperate pivot, accusing me of disloyalty. My voice remained steady, a quiet counterpoint to his rising panic. This isn't about loyalty, I said, sliding the final page, a court summons, across the wood. It's about accountability for what you've built. The silence that followed wasn't an admission of guilt, but a surrender of power. His metaphorical throne, built on sand and deceit, was finally empty, replaced by the stark clarity of consequences. The path ahead, free from his oppressive influence, felt wide open, unburdened. I was born into your empire, but I chose to dismantle it. I am not a subject. I am the architect of my own domain. If this story resonated, what empires are you quietly reshaping in your own life? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more journeys of strategic comeback.